Hello, and welcome back to Bruce Mackey's Library. And before we get into our episode for our whole winning book, They Won the Vote, I just want to say I got to sit down with my friend Degrassi Kid recently and do an interview with them about my plans for the podcast in 2025. And I highly recommend checking that out if you would like to know about how things will change as I get into the Degrassi Junior High series and those books probably around May. And now we'll get into the episode. The book that won the vote shocked the heck out of me. Imagine a drum roll. Karen Keeps Her Word. Somehow got 5 votes, even though last time it got 0. Y'all just love to shock me. Y'all just played a little joke on me. Martin Meets the Pirates will be February's episode. It got 2 votes, so still did a decent job. And we're going to get into Karen Keeps Her Word now. The publication date, again, January 1st, 1987. Dedication goes to Barb and Mac McKay for their friendship and support. So I did some light Googling on Barb and Mac. Barb plays Miss McCurdy in episode 14, which is The Canards Move Out. And Mac plays Mr. McCurdy, as well as a rope safety in 4 episodes of Man vs. Wild. So the McCurdys are the family who goes to look at buying the Canards house when they move out. And they're spelled like Mackay, so that's why I pronounced it like McKay instead of Mackie. Barb and Mac McKay. We have a different designer for this book as well as a different illustrator, but sadly I could not find valid information on them. Our designer is credited as Dread Not, Dreadnaught, which is, there's a type of like Star Wars ship thing named the same thing, as well as like a sail ship or a sailboat or whatever you want to call it is also called the same thing. So no designers were showing up for that. Sadly, I could not find any. I searched for like a whole hour, could not figure it out. The illustrator is Annie Wood, and I found 3 different Annie Woods. Not helpful at all. One is in LA, one was not even credited as an illustrator, but instead like a photographer. One was an actor. I don't know. I'm so sorry. And our editor, again, is Sheila Dalton. She's edited like the last 2 books, so you can find information on her linked in those episodes, I'm pretty sure. We have our Goodreads rating of 4.67 stars with only 3 ratings and no reviews, so I'm sorry. Our description from the Formac Lormer website says, "How can you make it up when you break a promise to a friend? What do you do when a good friend changes suddenly and completely? When they seriously hurt your feelings?" Karen Keeps Her Word and Other Stories shows young people who are faced with challenging dilemmas and respond with spirit and ingenuity. These stories offer delightful evidence of youthful creativity and resourcefulness in the face of hard questions. Based on the groundbreaking television program, this book offers a sensitive and engaging look at the challenges of childhood. They describe the subjects as juvenile fiction / social themes / emotions plus feelings and friendship. The episodes included are Samantha Gets a Visitor, which is episode number 18, Karen Keeps Her Word, episode number 22, and Martin Hears the Music, which is episode number 24. I will give a small trigger warning for Martin Hears the Music because it includes diet culture and a lot of bullying towards someone who's hard of hearing. And Karen Keeps Her Word is a little light on Fatphobia, but there is some in there. And then Karen Keeps Her Word should also have a trigger warning for nuclear missiles. That's really all of the trigger warnings. I'll remind you of them as I get closer to those. I have a physical copy, so you will hear the pages turning and such. It's editing me here. I'm just going to apologize because the next 15 minutes or so have some kind of crappy audio because my dog was having a panic attack and breathing very heavily the entire time. And I'm sorry. Somebody outside was leaf blowing. That is what caused her panic attack and heavy breathing. I'm really sorry. So the microphone caught a little bit of both, and I just can't get it out. I really tried, though. So we start Samantha Gets a Visitor off with a picture, and our pictures disappear again in this book. There's now only 3 in this entire book. So, again, it might have something to do with the illustrator. Kind of sucks, because I do like this illustration style that we have going. The hair is really cool and 80s looking in the pictures. And it's a picture of when Tom goes missing for a bit, and Lisa and Sam, also known as Samantha, are yelling for Tom. As Tom, yelled Samantha, still no reply. What if he's lost or hurt or something, suggested Lisa, biting her lip. And we get a little bit of background about Samantha and Tom in this book. Lisa Kennard was feeling really good. There she was, sitting on the bus, on the way to visit her favorite cousin's farm for the weekend. She'd chosen a seat near the front so that she'd be able to see the old blue and red bus stop the moment it appeared. She hoped she'd still recognize it. After all, she hadn't been there for 3 years. That's good to know. And she'd only been 9 then. Maybe her cousins Sam and Tom would look different too. It was 2 years since she'd seen them. They'd come to Toronto with her Aunt Beth and Uncle Ed for Dad's wedding to Gail. And the book spells Gail like Gayle. A lot of debate I've seen online is that it's Gail, so that's what the book spells it as. Lisa and Sam had been really close then, sharing confidences and gossiping happily together. Tom was still a little kid, and not so much fun to be with as his sister. So that's how she describes them. I thought it was really good to get that background info. That is page 3. My next note is for page 5, and it says, different outfit in the episode. So in the episode, Samantha is wearing loose khakis, but the book describes it as Lisa hopped among the straw bales and held out a hand to Sam, who was making rather heavy weather of it in her tight jeans. So I just found that interesting. And my next note is for page 9, where it kind of is going to explain the camper's companion. This is the tool that Lisa buys at the general store kind of thing in the country, because it goes a little bit deeper than the show does. She wandered off on a rack above a stack of liquid gas containers. She spied something interesting. What could a camper's companion be? She took the item down to examine it. It looked like a huge charm bracelet with a heap of attachments dangling from a sturdy chain. There was a small flashlight, a pocket knife, a bottle opener, and waterproof matches. Might come in handy. And not expensive. Lisa decided to buy it. So, that's interesting that it had so many different things. And then page number 11, I have 2 notes. One says, the tackle box was a recent birthday gift. So, Tom's reaction to the expedition was a lot different from his sister's. He was delighted to be asked along. The new tackle box he'd been given for his birthday was crying out to be used. I like that because he seemed really, really sad when it, spoiler alert, it floats away in the river, and he's really sad about it. So it's good to understand like why he was so attached. And then there's a line that's different than the episode a little bit farther below, where Tom asks about why Lisa is packing garbage bags. And in the book, he says, what do we need them for? And she says, garbage, dummy, said Lisa kindly. Don't pollute the woods and all that. And to put our wet bathing suits in case we go swimming. And in the episode, it's just for the wet bathing suits. It's not for garbage. But I find it interesting. I like it better if it's for garbage because back in our very first episode of Kids of Degrassi Street, we have that talk of garbage and that whole movie being made about garbage and my whole dig about the Orbit trash cans. I have not let them go. I still remember the Orbit trash cans. They are important to me. So I like that that's there, and I wish they would have kept it, but maybe not her calling him a dummy. I do like that they took that out, and maybe the dummy is why they took it out of the episode. I'm not sure, to be honest. And then I have another note on page 13 just because I found it interesting. It says, Samantha reappeared in red jeans and a patterned long-sleeved shirt. She carried an Aronik. It's spelled Anorak. And I had to Google that because I didn't know what it was. I had never heard of that before. And apparently it's a type of jacket that can fold into itself for easy carrying. So I just thought that was interesting. She folds it into itself a little bit and ties it around her waist. And the whole entire episode, I thought it was a fanny pack until I saw her untie it and put it on. So when I saw it in the book, I was like, what the heck is an Aronik? And I Googled it, and that's the name for that jacket that she put on that I thought was a fanny pack. So I thought that was really interesting. I want to dive deeper into it, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna resist. So then on page 15, it says that Lisa is really excited to show off some of her camping skills because it's like this thing that Lisa and Samantha in the whole episode novelization seem to be trying to like one-up each other on their camping skills, even though Samantha did not want to go camping and fishing at all. And there's this part, it's Lisa asked, you guys know how to canoe? Sure. Tom sounded a bit scornful. We've been canoeing with Dad lots of times. What about you? He hadn't noticed many canoes on Degrassi Street the last time he visited Toronto. I learned last summer at guide camp, answered Lisa proudly. It felt good to show off her woodland lore to her country cousins. Even city slickers knew a thing or two. Honestly, so wild that like she just seems so like she has to show them she hasn't lost her country edge and she still knows a thing or two. Very interesting to me. And then there's a small scene on page number 17 where Lisa loses her hat. Even though the picture I was describing earlier is of a scene that happens after this, and in that picture she is wearing the hat. And in the episode, she doesn't lose the hat. But in the book, it clearly says that she lost a hat. It says, as the canoe skimmed towards it, the crew leaned way back, almost like limbo dancers, and shot safely underneath The only casualty was Lisa's hat, which went bobbing Galilee, Gaily, Galilee, away. And that's like when they're floating towards that tree limb that falls down and they have to duck under it. I find it so weird that they like made that point that she lost her hat, but in the picture she's got a hat on. In the episode she's got her hat on. So strange. And on page 21 is kind of my next note. It's a bit of a long one. They really drew out the scene where Tom goes missing, and they made it way scarier and like way longer than the episode. So I'm just going to read the whole thing. It says, away among the trees, Tom, his arms collapsed around an enormous bundle of firewood, heard their voices. Strange. The faint sound seemed to come from way in front, not behind him. He turned around, dropping some of his sticks. As he bent to pick them up, a few more slipped from the pile. Oh, phooey, he thought. I give up. Got enough anyway. He started to move off, and then stood pondering. Which way had he been facing when he picked up the sticks? All the trees around him looked alike. There'd been a dappled patch of sunlight on the grass in front of him. Was it that there? Or was that a different one? There were an awful lot of them. He plunged impulsively through a gap between two towering birches and found himself waist deep in bracken. He stumbled back, beating off a small cloud of gnats and mosquitoes, and set off in a different direction. Samantha blundered into a tiny clearing, cupped her hands, and called, Tom! Tom? Lisa had lagged behind a little on the way, stopping to arrange arrow shapes with twigs or scratch marks onto tree trunks. I'm marking the trail, she explained, as she caught up with Samantha, who had stopped to rest on a broken tree stump. Let's hurry, said Samantha, setting off once more. A shrill, high-pitched note rose higher and higher above their heads. Lisa stiffened. Gazing upwards, the noise broke off as suddenly as it had started. What was that? She cried, catching at her cousin's arm in alarm. Berry bug, said Samantha, harmless. She smiled to herself. There was still some things that clever Lisa didn't know, but she stopped smiling at the next mysterious noise, a rhythmic shuffling of leaves behind the edge of the clearing. Hushed, the girls froze, listening to a shuffle shuffle. Tom? Called Samantha. Tom? The noise seemed to be coming closer. It can't be Tom, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He'd have answered. Do you think, quavered Lisa, that it's a bear? Samantha whispered, if it is, they're supposed to be shy. Lisa wondered if bears knew that they were supposed to be shy. Suppose this one was an extrovert. She stared wide-eyed at her cousin, who muttered under her breath, maybe if we make some noise, it would scare it away. Like singing or something? And then Samantha nodded and burst into the first song that came to her mind. And then Lisa begged to not sing the one about the teddy bears and their picnic. Side note, that song always makes me think of that scene in Pretty Little Liars where Mona's singing that same exact song in Radley. So that song really creeps me out for that reason. I don't originally remember where the song came from. Maybe it's like Winnie the Pooh or something really, really cool. But it just creeps me out and scares me now. So, fun fact about me. Yeah, and then it kind of stays the same to the episode after that. But it's just really interesting to hear Lisa's thoughts about, like, she thinks that maybe the bear is an extrovert. It's very funny. I'm sorry if you hear a lot of clambering noises. My dog got scared because someone is leaf blowing outside. So she has come underneath my desk to sit by my feet and cower because she is scared. She is cowering in fear. It's kind of cute. But yeah. So That is the entirety of how it got longer and like a bit scarier, but not too much. And my next note isn't until page 26, so like 3 more pages after that one. And a lot of that episode is them walking through the woods. So my next note is literally just more details of their walk through the woods. And it says, her brother dragged sulkily up the bank, still mourning the loss of his fish. Lisa gathered up the knapsack and followed Samantha reluctantly into the undergrowth. With the 2 others trailing unhappily behind her, Samantha marched off in the direction of home. At least she thought it was in the direction of home. Stumbling over dead branches, climbing fallen logs, beating their way through bushes, they forged deeper and deeper into the woods. Tom refused to be parted from his fishing gear, even though his sister inquired scornfully how many fishes' nests he expected to find in the trees. When it got tangled on branches for the 4th or 5th time, he began to wish he'd left it in the canoe. It seemed as though they had been tramping for ages. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then Tom, stumping along in the rear, began to feel very sorry for himself. I'm cold, he complained. So yeah, it really drags on and emphasizes how attached he is to his fishing gear. I thought that was an interesting way to describe it all. My next note isn't until page 33, and my note says, interesting way to word that situation. So, when Tom tries to get another fish after they realize that Samantha ate all the sandwiches earlier, he gets wet when he's fishing because it's too dark for him to be fishing and he accidentally drops some of his gear in the water and it goes chasing after it. So it says, give me your wet things, said Lisa, turning away to hide her amusement. She propped the pants on a couple of sticks near the fire, alongside his discarded socks and boots. Samantha gave him what she'd been working on with the scissors. Here, put this on. A garbage bag, howled Tom. This was really the end. It'll keep your body heat in, said Samantha, popping it over his head, and keep the damp out. He gave her a long-suffering look as he pushed his arms through the holes. This is the interesting part. Then squatted between the girls, feeling victimized by females and fate. Thought it was interesting that he felt victimized by females. He felt victimized by Lisa and Samantha? He was a victim of fate, sure, but Lisa and Samantha didn't do anything wrong, so I thought that was a weird way to word it. And then on page 34, which is the very next page, there's a small part where they kind of describe the mattresses made out of pine that they sleep on. It says, they persuaded him at last to curl up on the pine mattresses, where, worn out, he dropped off to sleep like a baby. The girls made up the fire and lay beside him on the spicy sweet branches. I thought it was interesting they described him as spicy sweet. Not really sure what they mean by that, but that's how they describe pine. And then on page 35, we have some of Lisa's kind of inner thoughts as they kind of draw the night on a little bit longer than we get to see in the episode. So it says, they sat quietly, deep in unhappy thought. Lisa's hopes for the visits had come to nothing. Her aunt and uncle would be really cross. And after she went home tomorrow, they'd never ask her again. Even worse, Samantha had changed, grown away from her. They used to have such fun together when they were little kids. Lisa glanced miserably at her now. In the fading firelight, Samantha said, don't look so sad, Lisa. Lisa gave a sigh. It's just sad that we can't be friends like we used to be. Samantha knew exactly what she meant. Over the weekend, she'd started to think that she was growing up faster than her cousin. Maybe it didn't matter all that much. Not as much as Lisa thought, anyway. We still like some of the same things, she said encouragingly. Like what? Well, like today. It's been ages since I was in the woods, and I'd forgotten how neat it was. It's true. I don't really like fishing anymore. But honest, Lisa, I did have a good time. At least until all this happened. Lisa thought it over. I guess maybe it's dumb to figure that we still have to do everything together. Sam put an arm around her. You're still my favorite cousin. She really meant it. She figured that Lisa would catch up with her one day soon, and they'd have things in common again. Maybe not the same ones they'd share as kids, but girls' things, adult things. It probably wouldn't be too long before Lisa started poring over makeup and magazines too. And meanwhile, she was still really nice and a lot of fun. Lisa's sigh was a contented one as the girls huddled together and drifted off to sleep to the soothing sounds of rustling leaves and the hurrying river. They slept through the dawn and into the warming sunlight of early morning. So I like that part because they get really deep into how they still think they're so different. But sooner or later, they'll grow up. Especially Samantha really thinks that Lisa will become a lot more girly throughout the years, just like she did. And I will say for some girls that's true. For some people in general, like that's true, but a lot of people stay the same. So I don't know. I don't really love that that's what she thinks of Lisa, but it's still interesting, and I wanted to point it out. And that was the last note for Samantha Gets a Visitor. And we're on to Karen Keeps Her Word, the title episode. And our first picture, our only picture for this one, is Karen after Pete kind of breaks his leg. And it's captioned as Karen glanced sorrowfully, I don't know, at Pete's bandaged foot. And I know how it feels when you break a commitment. It's captioned her saying that. And it starts with a little bit more info on how long Karen's been dreaming about those skates and how much she really cares about them, kind of for all of page 43. So I think I'm just going to read that whole page. I hope you don't mind. It says, for the past 5 days, without fail, Karen had stopped to gaze longingly into the window of the second-hand store on her way home from school. The glass dishes, pottery dogs, vases, and pictures might as well not have been there, for all she cared. But those white roller skates, decorated with silver, red, and blue stars, seemed to be calling out to her. We're for you, Karen. How about buying us? The trouble was, her savings were just about zilch. Her birthday had come and gone just before the skates appeared in the window to tempt her. If only she hadn't already spent her birthday money on the movies and that new sweatshirt. It was going to take a long time to save $25. And by then, maybe those red wheels would be speeding some other kid along Degrassi Street. She'd caught the roller skating bug after she'd borrowed her friend Connie Jacobs' skates one day. She'd longed for a pair of her own ever since, and those glittering boots, like something a movie star would wear, were the ones she'd set her heart on. So Karen really thinks highly of these, and we see that in the episode, of course, but I really like how much more they emphasize and describe and really draw it out there. I do have another note on page 44 that's a little bit of it's a very small amount of fatphobia towards Rachel. My note says, why point out her size? And it's in reference to where it says, While Karen daydreamed, Rachel Hewitt, a big girl who always looked serious, had presented the case for those who believed that nuclear arms race was necessary. Now Casey Rothels was winding up for the cons. I guess it's not really a huge note. It's not that mean, really, but I still don't love that that's how we describe Rachel Hewitt. There are other good things about Rachel. You could have, like, a short-haired girl. A very serious girl, still, yes. You could always just call her serious. But she's still friendly. She's often seen as in charge and passionate. Passionate's a good word for her. So, I just don't love that that's the first word we have for her. And then on page 45, there's a small note where I had to Google what something was again. So it kind of says here, well, said Miss Gonzalez, your classroom is now a nuclear-free zone. So, thought Karen, at the Kremlin, it might also be Kremlin, I don't know, and the White House, they're going to stay awake nights worrying? So I had to Google what the Kremlin, I don't know, Kremlin, I've never heard of this word before. I had to Google it, and it seems to be the Russian version of a White House. It is a house in Russia that is white, that seems to be of political importance of some kind. I didn't look deep into it, but that's what that is from what I can glean. I just wanted to point that out, that these books teach me things all the time. I never know what things are. The conversation that's on page 46 is not in this episode at all when I watched it, and I'm wondering if it was just put in there as a callback to make these events seem like they were a lot closer to each other. They're still pretty close to each other. There's still only like one episode in between these two, but still. So there's a small mention of Sam and the farm, and it says, sure, agreed Rachel, stopping in her tracks, but they all have to do them. So it isn't that simple. Who's going to be the first to give them up? Karen listened with growing amusement. They took this stuff so seriously. Even Lisa, who'd seemed kind of distracted since her weekend on her cousin's farm, got into the discussion. So that's the small mention of the cousin and their farm. I put Sam, even though Sam's name was not said. And then on page 49, there's a bit of a cost breakdown for kind of the yearbook and how much they're actually getting for this 2 pages of advertisement that they seem really excited by. It kind of breaks down how much they need for the yearbook and what they are trying to raise with the later on window washing and the next episode in this book's talent show, once they decide to turn this advertisement down. So it says, sure, said Casey. I met Miss Frost yesterday, and I was telling her all about the yearbook and about selling advertising space. And she goes, to raise money? And I go, yes, we need it. And she goes, well, I guess my company will buy some. And today, when I saw her, she said they'd buy 2 whole pages. 2 whole pages, echoed Pete. Wow, that's $60. Almost half of what we need. The yearbook garage reverberated with oohs and ahs and cheers as the committee surrounded Casey, clapping her on the back and yelling, all right, way to go. So I thought that was really interesting. And they added more to that conversation with Miss Frost than they do in the episode, really breaking down exactly what Casey remembers her saying. And then I have another note on page 53 about how Karen is really so Lucy, in my opinion. And a lot of that is just because we see when Lisa turns into Caitlin and other characters such as those, how much they keep of the original character and how much they change. And it's really not a lot of change. But I thought it was interesting where it says, Rachel and Casey looked pleased and interested. Karen rolled her eyes. Boring, she thought. Any questions? Asked Miss Gonzalez. Yeah, when do we get to talk about something else? Thought Karen. but she didn't dare say it out loud. She managed to get through the school day somehow, impatient for the afternoon and the money-making window washing session. At 10 to 4, she was loitering outside Tony's barber shop, measuring the window with her eye and reading the notices. 2 barbers, no waiting, ladies' haircut, compare our prices. The white-coated men inside, busy with scissors and clippers, glanced out at her. Do they think I'm comparing prices, she thought, or considering having my hair cut? Hey, says no waiting. What would they say if I told them I'm a window washer, waiting to buy roller skates? At last, Pete came into sight, wheeling his bike with a ladder. And it goes on a little bit more. But I just thought it was really interesting to show, like, Karen's just not into all this nonsense about nuclear weapons and what they think kids can actually do in this world. And I find that kind of to be a little loosey. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. But that's my thoughts. As I'm editing, I'm thinking about how this Karen kind of reminds me of Kathleen during the episode Smokescreen, and how she's more interested in the name of the club than what the club's actually doing for the Environmental Action Committee, because she doesn't think they'll listen to a bunch of kids anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And there's a little bit of info on the next page about their equipment, and I thought it was interesting to just hear how it's a little different from the episode. Not by much, but just a little bit. It says, too bad the original words Pete and Martin's window wash had been crossed out and replaced with Pete and Griff's window wash before Karen's name had finally been added third. I think in the episode I didn't notice a Pete and Griff. I only noticed Pete and Martin, where the Martin was crossed out to put Karen. So I think that was an interesting choice. And it says, it's pretty obvious that she was Pete's third choice. But what should she care? $2 was $2. And at $1 a window each, I figured it out, she said. I need $24.85. Pete was struggling with the ladder and raised his eyebrows. To get the roller skates I want, she explained. Oh, he said. Hey, help me get this ladder up. It was a ladder that had seen better days. A whole lot of better days. Probably in someone's backyard. It was paint-stained, the wooden treads had soaked up plenty of rain, and the ropes that were supposed to hold the 2 halves secure looked a bit, well, chewed. Karen didn't think much of it as a ladder. As a means to an end, the purchase of roller skates, it was just fine. As long as either she or Pete stayed on the ground to hold it steady, they should do all right. The bucket was new and shining. The washer was big, yellow, and spongy. Miss Riley hadn't missed them from her broom closet yet. Pete said, I'll just get hot water from Tony. Then, Karen, if you climb the ladder, I'll hold it, just in case it slips or anything. He returned with the bucket slopping with soapy water and handed her the washer. She started up the ladder quickly and confidently. So I just thought it was interesting to hear the description of the ladder, as well as like just the sign and the washer. And in the episode, there's a little bit of information about how Pete is scared to go on the ladder because his dad fell off of a ladder and broke his leg. So in the book on page 56, there's a bit more info about when Pete's dad was wearing a cast and what Pete thought of that. And it says, Pete shrugged. It wasn't that bad. He looked a bit like Return of the Mummy, and he said his cast felt like it was full of itching powder. It made me kind of nervous, you know? So that was just that little line of information that I thought was interesting. And on the next page, there's even more, just a little bit of info. about Karen's aunt that sends her the exact amount of $25 that she needs to buy those skates. And it says, as Karen came through the front door, she saw a heap of mail lying on the doormat. She was about to throw it in the basket, as usual, when she saw her own name, Miss Karen Gills, postmarked Winnipeg. Auntie Joyce! She tore the letter open to find 2 tens and a $5 bill tucked inside a sorry I missed your birthday card. So, an auntie named Joyce from Winnipeg. That's what I found interesting. Because they're in Toronto, and I don't know how far Winnipeg is from Toronto. I'm so tempted to Google it, but I'm just not going to. Not right now. I did a lot of Googling the last episode in the middle of recording, and it really took forever to edit when I did that. So there's a little part on the next page that I felt like when I was reading it that this wasn't very Connie. And Connie is one of my favorite characters. I feel like there's a Connie to LD to Adam pipeline that's also a little bit to Yael. I just feel like Connie is a tomboy through and through. Connie is not someone who gets jealous of frivolous things and things like that matter. I could be wrong. I did not create these characters, but this is how I feel about this character. So when it says, they sat on a concrete guardrail, lacing up. Connie couldn't resist an envious glance at the glitzy boots on Karen's feet. They made her own scuffed ones look kind of tacky. I just don't feel like that's Connie to me, because this is after Connie makes a catch. And Connie kind of comes into her own, and in that episode, I feel like she stops trying to impress people. She doesn't care about peer pressure. She's not trying to impress some boy or anything like that. She really realizes that it's important to be herself. So I just don't feel like this is that Connie anymore. I could be wrong. It's just, that's how I feel. I feel like Connie is one of my favorite characters, and that's not how she would act. Anyway, there's a part that isn't in the episode on page 60. That's my next note. And I can understand why it's not in the episode after I read it, but I find it really interesting that it's in the book. And it starts off as, "Oh no," shouted Pete, as he and the bucket flew through the air and hit the sidewalk with an alarming crash. 5 minutes later, an ambulance was speeding to the scene of the accident. The howl of its siren could be heard as far away as Degrassi Street. Lisa and Casey lifted their heads from their task of digging up weeds from Casey's mother's flower beds and listened for a moment, but neither girl paid much attention to the sound. Casey, for one, was thinking too deeply about something else. She was still pondering her encounter the day before with Miss Frost, the lady who had bought the ad in the yearbook. Casey had been in the Rothfelds' yard then too, trimming the hedge. A blue Mazda had driven up, and out of it stepped Miss Frost. With a brisk tap of her high heels, she crossed the street to speak to Casey. This part is in the episodes. I don't need to keep reading it. But I thought the ambulance was kind of interesting that they really dragged it out for the book, because it kind of reminds me of how in the book version of Ida Makes a Movie, they have to fly to the award ceremony for the movie. And they didn't do that in the episode, of course, because flying would be outrageous for your very first episode, or really a lot of episodes in general. And that's kind of how it is here. In a book, you can put that an ambulance was there, and you don't need to actually rent an ambulance for the book. In the episodes, you would need to have an actual ambulance. You couldn't just have a siren going or something. So it's interesting that, like, in the episode, they just flashed the next day. I like how they added a little bit more here. So I just wanted to tell you all about it. And my next note is really, really close to that on page 62. There's one note about a conversation that's not in the episode, even though it's very interesting. And it starts off, but the problem stayed with her. So much so that now her friend Lisa's conversation was merely background noise. Suddenly, Casey realized that Lisa was asking, "What do you think?" "About what?" she asked vaguely, dragging her thoughts back to the present. "Casey, you're not listening." Lisa studied her. "I was talking about Karen. I was wondering why she thought kids couldn't change things." When there was still no response from her friend, Lisa said, "There's something wrong, isn't there?" Casey shook her head. "Oh, come on," said Lisa. "I've known you since we were little. Tell me." "Oh, well, the trouble's shared and all that." "Okay, it's about that check from the lady." She jerked her head towards the house across the street. "She changed her mind?" asked Lisa, in consideration. "No, no, it's just that, well, her company sort of makes stuff." And that part of the conversation is in the episode. But I thought it was interesting that Lisa really cares about Karen saying that kids can't change things. Because if you continue with the thought of like how Lisa turns into Caitlin, Lisa and Caitlin both seem to think that kids really can affect change and their opinions really matter and people will listen, when Karen doesn't and Lisa really cares about it. And then my next note is on page 64. And my note says, "Interesting choice to have Lisa care so much about Karen and her opinion when in the episode she really only cares about Griff." So this really does continue, and that's why I think it's so interesting. So that note is towards when it says, "In an atmosphere of gloom, the girls sat on the school stairs the next morning, still discussing their problem. They felt they had to do the right thing and tell the committee, but Casey hated to imagine what they'd think of her. Being the hero of the hour, the savior of the yearbook, had been very pleasant. She was feeling badly enough without Lisa bringing up the subject of Karen again. If she thought we were so stupid to try before, what's she going to think now?" she was saying. Just then Karen came along the corridor, wincing at every other step. And this is when Karen starts to talk about her blisters. I'm not going to read that because I think it's gross and so do they. And that's in the episode, so I don't need to point it out. But it's just very interesting because in the episode, Lisa is talking about trying to get Griff draw the pictures for the yearbook. And there's nothing in the part of Karen thinking this thing is so dumb that she brings it up to Lisa and Lisa can't stop thinking about it. I find it really interesting because why did they change that? Why does it seem like Lisa and Griff aren't talking at all in this episode and Lisa is not going to care about it? Isn't caring at all that Griff's not talking to her. When in the TV version, that is what's happening. Lisa's so concerned about it, and in the book, it's not mentioned at all. And I'm wondering if it's because the Griff Gets a Hand episode novelization had already been published and everything, so they're just not bringing that up, or what's going on. I don't know. I don't know if it's like a rough draft thing. Honestly, I'm just so curious. That's why when my next note says this convo is so different from the episode, it's not going to surprise you because this whole book is so different from the episode. So it's in response to, "She came alongside. Honest, Pete, I meant to come. It was just that my aunt sent me some money, and I bought the skates, and Connie and me, we were skating, and you knew you had to be there at 5. But I was so excited, I just forgot. Connie forgot her paper route, too. It wasn't until she remembered and rushed off to do that I remembered." So in the episode, she doesn't mention that Connie forgot her paper route at all, or that Connie remembered her paper route first and then she rushed off. So that's what's different. It doesn't seem like a big difference to some people, but I thought it was very interesting that Connie is more responsible than Karen, and that's what's pointed out. And we're getting close to the end of this one. There's a small mention of what the store they're window washing in the end is. And in the episode, they don't mention what it's going to be at all. But they do kind of have a small conversation about it not being anything towards nuclear weapons. They don't mention it being a drugstore in the episode. So here it says, by the weekend, the whole committee was out on the job. Pete had negotiated a deal with the owner of a glass-sided building that was just about to open as a drug mart. He'd had the latter fixed, borrowed another from Lisa's dad, and even arranged the loan of some long washers from the neighborhood hardware store. As befitted a high-powered negotiator, he supervised his staff from a lawn chair, his crutches beside him. Casey, sponging away next to Rachel, said, "Know what? I bet we can make just as much window washing as Miss Frost would have given us." "Maybe," conceded Rachel. "At least we're doing it ourselves." And that's kind of when they go into when it's talking about not making stuff for nuclear missiles. And it says, "A drugstore?" Pete shouted. "Explosive toothpaste? Radioactive shampoo? Lisa?" "Don't worry, you guys," Casey said. "It's okay. I already checked." "Didn't trust me, eh?" thought Pete. "I'll fix you, Casey." "Hey," he called out from the boss's chair, raising a crutch and pointing. "You missed a spot. Casey, you got smears." Karen hurled a wet sponge at him. "Shut up, partner." So that is the end of Karen Keeps Her Word. And now we're at the last episode of this book. And this is where the trigger warning comes in for diet culture and bullying. There's even a small racist remark that I'll trigger warning about as we get closer to it. That one's not in the episode, it's only in the book. And we start off with a picture that is already going towards the trigger warning of diet culture. It's a picture of when Rachel and Martin run into each other at Degrassi Grocery, and Rachel is carrying a candy bar, a bag of chips, and some cookies because she seems to stress eat and eat her emotions a lot, which I wish they would have touched on that more than just having an improper diet, because they kind of didn't focus on what can trigger some cravings and what can trigger you to stress eating is a real thing and emotional eating is a real thing. And when you don't know how to cook properly, as she is a kid and her mom has been working nights, so she doesn't know how to cook, she doesn't know how to make dinner. That's a lot of it as well. And so they don't really point that out, and I just thought that was interesting. I also find it interesting, this picture has 2% milk costing $2.98, and I already know that American money is worth more in Canada than it is, like, for Canadian money. So that's obviously Canadian money that they're talking about because it's Canada. So it's just really interesting to think of, like, 2% milk, and it was like a little paper carton, not even a half gallon. That's really expensive milk, and especially for back then, like, my gosh. Our half gallons cost like $2.98 in America. Well, where I am right now. And that was less milk than that, and that was how much it was costing. That's wild. So I thought that was interesting, but the picture is captioned as, "What are you doing here?" Martin asked. "Nothing," Rachel said, drawing away. She knew it was a dumb answer. She wasn't doing nothing. She was buying potato chips, candy bars, and cookies because she felt so terrible about what had happened at the rehearsal. Like, yeah, it's obvious that she's upset when she's buying the food, and they caption that as the reason in this book, but they really don't say it outright that, like, hey, you're eating due to emotions a lot of the time. And I feel like that would have been more helpful for kids to, like, really point out the reason behind why she's eating these certain things, why she's gravitating towards them, and things like that. But my very first note is she makes Rachel seem so mean. And this is even before the crash dieting has started. So it starts, Rachel Hewitt was feeling slightly cheesed off. Don't I have enough to do as yearbook director without taking care of all the paperwork as well? She asked herself for the 100th time. What I need is a secretary. She glanced around the room. Which of the yearbook committee to ask? Pete Riley and Jeffrey Clayton were discussing finances while looking at the big cardboard fundraising thermometer. Even with the money the committee had raised washing windows, there was still a long way to go. Rachel knew Pete and Jeffrey had too much to do as it was, without taking on even more work. She looked around some more. Too bad Connie Jacobs, at the moment, choosing photographs to paste up on a display board, was a hopeless typist. Lisa Kennard and Casey Rothfels, who were supposed to be helping Connie, were giggling together as they broke into an impromptu version of their show routine. I'm Phyllis. I'm Fran. We're going south to get a man. I love that one. Pinning those two down to work, thought Rachel, was like trying to poke a needle into a ball of mercury. I don't know what she means by that. They'd never do. Then her glance fell on Martin Schlegel. Good, stolid, dependable Martin was counting bundles of printed flyers advertising the coming talent show. Martin would make a wonderful secretary. Rachel called to him through the noise and chatter. And the episode kind of picks up that part where she's talking to him. But I want to point out a note. I didn't take this note on page 77, but I found it really interesting of the actual lyrics of the Phyllis and Fran song because I find it adorable. But I got the lyrics wrong in my head before I read this book. So it's, we're going south to get a man. We better find one soon. We're getting really tense. I thought it was, we're getting really tan because they were like worried about like getting a tan and getting like sunburnt and stuff. I was wrong. They're not worried about getting tan. I thought it was tan because it rhymes with man and it's really catchy that way and it was fun. And I knew it started with a T. I was wrong. So I just wanted to point that out in case you were wrong too. And then on page 78, we actually get to learn the cause of Martin's hearing loss. And I thought that was interesting because I was really curious during the episode because it seemed to come out of nowhere. And I thought, well, maybe they're just trying to point out sometimes things can really happen when you don't think they're going to, or you don't notice there's no real line and cause to why it would happen. But no, they give one in the book that I guess they just didn't point out in the episode. So it says, Martin felt terrible. He pedaled his bike hard towards the audiocologist's office and tried to forget about the kids staring at him, waiting for an answer when he didn't even know there'd been a question. And then Pete saying, "Are you deaf or something?" Martin wondered what Pete would have done if he'd answered him. "Yeah, I am. What's it to you?" Because for the last couple of years, ever since he'd had a really bad head cold one winter, Martin had been finding it harder and harder to hear clearly. At first, it had only been a sort of popping that went away when he swallowed, but now it was getting like wearing earphones all the time with no music on. His doctor sent him regularly to a special clinic to get his ears tested. The trouble was, every time he went, his hearing seemed to have gotten that little bit worse. It didn't take long to get to the audiologist's office. When Martin arrived, he joined his mother in the waiting room. Soon an examiner came and led him behind a glass screen for some tests. Martin could see her through the screen, sitting at her bank of dials and knobs, enough instruments to fly a 747, and through his headphones he heard her instructions. And you see that part in the episode. I just wanted to describe what he thought the room looked like and like what her little machine, I don't know what it's called, looked like. Because there's even more thoughts on page 81 that Martin has that we obviously don't get in the episode. And it says, if his mom hadn't insisted, Martin wouldn't even have considered wearing the aid to school the next day. As he bumped his bike down the porch steps, he muttered for the 10th time, maybe I should just wear it at home at first to get used to it. Martin, he knew that tone in her voice. First day with anything new is always hard. Not always, thought Martin rebelliously. New shoes, new jeans, who noticed? Even new braces on your teeth. Everyone had those sometime. But who'd ever heard of a kid with a hearing aid? So I thought that was kind of interesting to get, like, braces. He thought every kid had braces. I didn't. I never had braces. I think my sister did, but I don't know if my brother did. But I didn't. And it says, she looked at his monotonous face with concern. And, like, that's where she kind of says that he's got really good friends at school and he's going to be okay. I'm going to add another diet culture trigger warning for my next note on page 83 because these are Rachel's inner thoughts. And it's a lot of fatphobia. And it says, she could think better if that comedy duo would let up for a minute. They'd found gaudy shirts patterned with palm trees and parrots, and were chorus lining very badly, I'm Phyllis, I'm Fran. As suddenly as they'd started, they'd stopped and delved into the basket again. This is a costume basket. That's when the trouble began. Hey, Rachel, Casey called. This would look real good on you. Rachel looked up to an elegant dress of dark silk, draped and flowing. The dress was huge. Rachel thought she knew what Casey was getting at. When you're a jumbo size, a dress the size of a tent is just about the only thing big enough to hide yourself in. Wow, it's beautiful, agreed Lisa, fingering the soft material. You should wear it for your song, Rachel. Rachel knew they meant it kindly, but she wished they wouldn't make it so obvious that she was, well, different. She held the dress against her. Yes, it was nice, but big. Self-consciously, she handed it back. I've already decided what I'm going to wear, she said. What? Casey asked casually. Head in the basket again. My favorite dress. The one my mom made me for my choir recitals last year. It's pink and it's got lace with pearl buttons. Sounds great, said Lisa politely. Too politely. What's she really thinking? Wondered Rachel. That I'm too fat for pink and pearls? She looked at her suspiciously, but the girls had already lost their interest. They'd found some absurd vegetable costumes and were trying them on. Casey had slipped into a narrow green tube with feathery fronds. I'm celery, green and yellowy, she sang. Lisa was stiffened inside a scarlet tabard. I'm a tomato, a round red tomato. I'm going south to date a potato. They laughed insanely. Waving their hands, Rachel lowered her eyes and began to peck at the piano. A phrase was forming to the notes. They're laughing and pointing, calling me names. And this is kind of where Rachel departs into the Degrassi grocery store. And it says, Bye, Casey said. See you tomorrow, Rachel. Good luck with your dress. What did she mean, good luck? Was she trying to be funny? Rachel went straight into the store to collect a supply of snacks for the evening. She knew exactly what she needed to cheer herself up. potato chips, candy bars, cookies. So in the book, they really make it obvious that that's what she's getting the food for, to cheer herself up, to make herself feel better after a bad day. And she already feels fat and bad about herself, and she can't control that that's like what she wants after having a bad day. But in the episode, they don't really point out it's because she's had a bad day. They really make it seem like this is what she eats all the time. So I wish they would have pointed that out more. That, like, you're eating your emotions. And it goes a little bit deeper. It says, once home, she spread them on her dressing table, stuffed a handful of chips in her mouth, and searched in her closet for the pink dress. It was so special that it hung in a garment bag and only came out for important occasions. She tried to remember the last time she'd worn it. Hey, it must have been almost 4 months ago at Christmas. She dragged off her sweater and skirt and wriggled into the dress. Surely it hadn't been such a squeeze to get into last year. She tried to smooth the wrinkles down over her hips and button the little pearls across the lace insert. The dress just would not close. Maybe it had shrunk. Hanging in the closet? Face facts, Rachel. It's you that's grown bigger. She scowled at herself. Fat, fat, gross. If you're going to wear this dress at the talent show, just over a week away, something's gotta be done, and quickly. For starters, she pitched the chips and candy bars in the waste bin. Then she sat down with her notebook and poured out her feelings. The next day, she'd found the Slim Fast diet in her local drugstore, and now 7 days later, she was hoping for results. As she stood expectantly on the scales in the nurse's office, she watched the marker move higher and higher. Oh no, this couldn't be right. She must have lost more than those stupid few ounces. She glared at the scale. Dumb thing. Useless. She thumped it, hurt her hand, and as the class bell sounded, flounced into the corridor in a thoroughly bad mood. And then there's a part where my next note is kind of a funny one. It says, I do love a good, cute misspelling that feels on purpose. So the next thing is, Connie came up, all smiles, camera at the ready. Hold it, Rachel. Cheese, please. And it spells please. Pleeze. I think that's cute, and it definitely feels on purpose to kind of lighten the mood. But yeah, the diet culture in this is very intense. So that's why I keep reiterating that trigger warning. Because the very next note is about the same exact thing, diet culture. And it's a note that isn't in the episode at any point. It says, hey Rachel, still going to wear your pink lace dress? Rachel, who had nothing but Slim Fast for breakfast, again, answered testily, yes, of course. What did Casey mean still? Sore point. Not for public discussion. It was fine, she'd added. Lisa said, we can't wait to see it. Rachel shot her a glance. Was she choking? Let's start the meeting, she said curtly. She banged on a barrel with a gavel, and the committee sorted themselves out and sat down. First, she said, is everybody here? Where's Martin? And it kind of just leads into my next note. My next note is, this happens way sooner during the episode. And in the episode, Martin leaves to get his hearing aid fitted before it happens. So it says, I think he's got another doctor's appointment, called Pete. Oh, brother, Rachel hoped. Nothing was wrong with Martin. But she needed him here. All right, now let's hear the report from our literary editor. So this is when Jeffrey reads the poem. And so I don't need to read that because that's in the episode. And I have a note that says, I don't like this part at all. And this is kind of when a few of the kids are trying to figure out who the mystery poem writer is. And it has a bit of racism. This is where the racism is. It's a very small remark. It's not really anything too deep, so I feel comfortable reading it out loud. It doesn't say any bad words or anything. It's just, there was an uncomfortable silence. The committee stared around at each other, all but one, puzzled and suspicious. Who was the anonymous writer? Unpredictable Connie? I don't feel like Connie's unpredictable. I disagree with that. It surely couldn't be Bossy Judy. I don't know who Judy is, but that's a bit mean. Or competent Rachel. Interesting way to describe her. Griff used to be a loner. Or was it dark-skinned Billy? Or Karen? Or Casey? Because they're the three kids of color, so dark-skinned. Billy or Karen or Casey, because that's the only reason why they could write this. Because of their skin color. Like, that's the only reason why they think people are laughing and pointing and calling them names. I don't think any of them would think that. I feel like Billy, Karen, and Casey all have decent friends who have never really seemed to bully them at all. And I don't understand why. I just, different time, I guess. But it says, not pretty Lisa or Pete, who is always so sure of himself. So it couldn't be Lisa because she's pretty. And it couldn't be Pete because he's always so sure of himself. Could it be Jeffrey himself? Covering up? Or was it someone from the class who wasn't around? Connie said it for all of them except one, who'd want to write a poem like that. I just don't like that part, and feels like a lot of on the surface reasoning for why these kids think that someone's pointing and laughing at them, and it doesn't feel right to me. I don't really like that part, but I wanted to make sure I read it anyway. It felt important to read. And then I have another, I just wrote interesting note. I don't know why. On page 90. And this one is another trigger warning for diet culture and Rachel and what she's going through. It says, a few rows back, Rachel sat listening to her stomach growl and wondering whether putting her poem in the yearbook contribution box had been such a good idea after all. Compared to these two, Pete Riley, who was wandering the aisles with a list of talent show performers, timing estimates, and checking details, was almost too cheerful. The next morning in class, Martin sat gazing into space, his hearing aid safely out of sight in his desk, as usual. He hadn't worn it at school once since he'd got it. As soon as he was out of his mother's sight, off it came. So that's not really of interest. What's really of interest is the Rachel stuff. That's the interesting note about her stomach growling and whether she should have put the poem in the yearbook contribution box or not. And as we go further down the page, we get more information about what everyone else in the class is doing. But most importantly, we get Pete's point of view. He bounded over beside Jeffrey, who was poring over the literary file. And that's kind of when they have that conversation about who they think wrote the poem, and they think it was Martin after this next note right here, where it says, Pete's thoughts as Martin put on the hearing aid. And it says, sure, he answered, fine, whatever you say. Pete, who'd wanted to know how long the magic act was going to take, looked at him baffled. Martin sure was acting weird, squirming around, cupping his ear and touching his shoulders. Hey, what did he clip on? A hearing aid? Suddenly it made sense. All that not listening and not answering and looking vague and cripes, thought Pete, what I had said. As Miss Gonzalez and Mrs. Schlegel came into the room, Pete signaled to Jeffrey, who was sitting behind Martin. Get that? He mimed, pointing to Martin's ear. Jeffrey got it quickly, and more. Behind Martin's back, he held up the mystery poem. Pete nodded in agreement. It had to be Martin. Who else? So I just thought that was interesting. And the very next page, it's a lot of notes for this section, is more of Rachel's diet culture stuff, so another trigger warning there. So sorry. And it says, meanwhile, Martin's mom, who was well into her talk, so we found many students your age are not getting a proper diet. Maybe some of you have been tempted to try some fad diet so that you can look more like fashion models. Rachel felt hot blood rise in her cheeks. So that I can look more like a human being, she thought. The best diet is the one that suits you. The wrong diet can make you tired and grumpy. Rachel was getting depressed, listening to Mrs. Schlegel. She knew she was probably right, but what was she supposed to do about it? The talent show was only 2 days away. She wasn't going to sail onto that stage like a whale wearing a dress. She just wasn't. Oh, brother. The situation looked hopeless. And it kind of ends there and goes into right after class. Peter and Jeffrey got together and discussed the subject of Martin. So that's not in my notes because it's really in the episode. My next note is a bit interesting because this entire series, I've been kind of keeping track of the amount of times that I think it's Eve Jennings mostly who's writing these books, compares the kids to dogs because it happens a lot. This is like the 5th time since I've started these books that it happens. So I thought that was interesting. There's a part right here where it says, Pete smiled approvingly, like I'm a puppy who's just learnt to go in the right place, thought Martin. What's with these guys? And that's kind of after they start talking really slowly and clearly, just like this, to Martin after they find the hearing aid, which is really not how you're supposed to treat deaf people. Or anyone, really. It's really rude. And just annoying. I thought that was interesting that, like, he feels like a puppy who just learned to go in the right place. And every time I say puppy, my dog's ears go up because she's asleep in the corner because she got scared of the sound outside. So I just thought that was interesting. And my next note is on the very next page. So again, a lot of notes in this one about Rachel and Connie. And it says, Connie leaned over to Rachel. Want to work together? And this is on that project that Miss Gonzalez assigns about nutrition, where they just have to write about nutrition. I'll work on my own, thanks. Rachel's voice, it was chilly. She just couldn't help it. She didn't want to talk about nutrition with anyone, especially anyone as slim as Connie, but would be better with 2. Rachel swung around. Didn't you hear what I said? She asked coldly. Connie backed off. Well, be like that, sourpuss. What's with you these days, anyhow? She wondered. Rachel hunched over her project. It sure was depressing to have to write about nutrition and diets when Miss Schlegel had spent a morning telling them how useless instant diets were. It looks like I'm just wasting my time, she thought. If I eat, I'll get fat. And if I don't eat, I'll get hungry. And if I get hungry, I'll eat. So I can't win. She studied the blackboard. Harmful side effects of such crash diets. Lassitude, loss of energy, depression, irritability. I know what I'll do, she thought suddenly. I'll stop by the drugstore and get some appetite-suppressing pills, and then maybe I won't need to eat at all. By the time Rachel got to the dress rehearsal for the talent show that night, she was feeling really uptight. She hadn't eaten a thing since breakfast. As she watched her classmates blunder through their acts, her thoughts got bleaker and bleaker. This talent show was going to be a stinker. A lack of talent show would be more like it. And I have a little sticky note on this page that I wrote, honestly, I wish they had given more time to this instead of half of an episode. And the same with Martin's storyline, especially since his is so rare. Because we don't really get any other hard of hearing characters in Degrassi. And I feel like any other show I can think of, to be honest. But we don't see her take appetite suppressing pills in the episode. And I don't really remember a lot of diet culture storylines in Degrassi Junior High in general. Like, I'm sitting here thinking and thinking, and other than that one where we don't even really focus on the character who has the, oh my gosh, spoiler alert, I'm so sorry, the anorexia, We really focus more on the twins who are doing the science project. So, like, even then, we don't focus much on it. And then, like, we all know a lot of the crash diet storylines in Degrassi kind of end during the episode that they start in. So I just wish Degrassi would do a better job at giving those more time. Just like a maybe 3 or 4 episodes, you know? But yeah, there's a little bit more here. Her thoughts got bleaker and bleaker. This talent show was going to be a stinker. A lack of talent show would be more like it. Maybe they should give all the ticket money back and call it quits. It would solve the problem of what she was going to wear anyhow. The pink dress still made her look like a potato in a doily. If they gave the money back, then the yearbook would lose out. But who cared about the dumb yearbook anyway? The others didn't. Not really. They just let her do all the hard work. And why should she, of all people, care about a yearbook? Who wanted to be reminded of Degrassi School and the kids who laughed at you? They'll probably look at my picture when they're old and say, "Remember that fat old Rachel Hewitt? Boy, was she gross," thought Rachel. Oh, for Pete's sake. Lisa and Casey had messed it up again. So yeah, she really just gets down on them. And it gets more and more into who she's mad at and who she's yelling at. Because it was really odd of her to yell at Benjamin and Lynn to get off the stage and stop acting up. When the last time we saw Lynn, especially, he was so helpful to her when she was running for office. The book says, a tomato and a head of celery raced across the stage, distracting them. And angry Rachel yelled, "Benjamin Martin, would you sit down? Lynn, get off the stage." And then and since he's got to be just right, sang Lisa. We stayed up all last night, sang Casey. Ouch. I did it again. Rachel gripped her pencil so hard it almost snapped. She was trying very hard not to scream. And it's just Casey and Lisa really messing this up. So the next one is the definition of a word that I didn't know, so I had to Google it. And it says, Jeffrey and Pete were making wild semaphores, trying to warn Rachel that Martin had a problem. Finally, Pete whispered, "Martin has to wear a hearing aid, Rachel. He doesn't have it on right now." So a semaphore, SEMAPHORES, is a visual signal. So like charades, wild waving and such. But in the episode, Rachel seems to already know about Martin's hearing aid, because she mentions it without anyone really pointing it out or anything. So, at least as far as I could notice, I didn't notice any semaphores. I do feel like it's wild that they use such big words in the children's book, because if I have to Google it at the age of 29, a child's not going to know what that means. They're going to have to ask a parent. There was no Google back then. It's just wild. And then the next one is on page 105. And it says, in the episode, less is said, and it's said at a restaurant while Rachel eats a salad. So this is the trigger warning diet culture, where Rachel and Mrs. Schlegel are kind of talking a bit. So it says right here, 10 minutes later, Rachel walked purposefully up the steps of the community health center. She was feeling rather nervous. A friendly smile from the receptionist helped, and the warm greeting from Mrs. Schlegel put her quite at ease. Across the desk in the dietitian's office, she poured out the whole story. And the appetite-suppressing pills didn't seem to work, and the instant diet was no good, even though the label said a team of European doctors had tested 1 million overweight women. "You mean you've had nothing to eat but instant diet for a week?" asked Mrs. Schlegel. Shamefaced, Rachel nodded. "If I got real hungry, I'd have a donut or a candy bar, but nothing else." Mrs. Schlegel shook her head sympathetically. "No wonder everyone said you were grumpy. Rachel, love, your body was crying out for the right food. Didn't your mother know what you were doing?" "She's been working nights," Rachel said. "I just left dirty dishes in the sink, so she'd think I'd eaten." Mrs. Schlegel sighed. "And all because she thought you didn't look good? You're a pretty girl, Rachel. but you'll soon spoil your looks with worry lines and strain, which makes sense because Rachel works really hard and stuff. And if your body doesn't get the right food for nourishment, your skin will suffer. Instead of that lovely complexion, you'll get flakes and zits, and your eyes won't be clear and bright, and your hair will get dull and fall out. At Rachel's look of distress, Miss Schlegel laughed. Enough horror stories. Let's do something practical about this. She glanced at her watch. Let's go eat. Over spinach salads and milk, Mrs. Schlegel continued gently. If you eat properly and exercise, you'll lose weight, but gradually. And you can make changes, Rachel, but make them because you want to, and not just to be like other people. And this is kind of when she goes into how boring it would be if we were all the same, which is in the episode. But I thought it was interesting that so much is said to be talked about at the community center, which we don't really see much of in the episode. I think we just see the outside of it before they go get spinach salads and milk. I hate milk. But I just found that interesting because that's not in the episode at all. A lot less is said in the episode. And the very next page has another note. It says, "This seems a bit mean to me." So it says, she sighed a little. It was a dream, an impossible dream, that she could ever be slim and wiry like Lisa and Casey. But it was no good starving herself and getting bad-tempered over it. And there was no point in being a quitter either. Maybe she'd take part in the talent show after all. I just think it was mean to say it was an impossible dream that she could ever be slim. Not that the goal should be to be slim, that's not what I'm saying. But I don't think it's an impossible dream either. She's a decent height. She could get taller. Things could even out. She could be slimmer. I just don't want her to be so hard on herself. But also, this is not the goal. If you are comfortable in your body and you're healthy according to a doctor, do whatever you want. Whatever. Let's not be mean to each other. Let's not be mean to ourselves. And my last note, thankfully, is actually not about the story of the episode at all anymore. It's just a strange order of the list of the books in the series after the episode novelization is over. So it just says, books in the series. Lisa makes the headlines in other stories. Casey draws the line in other stories. Karen keeps her word. Martin meets the pirates. Griff makes a date. And Griff gets a hand. I just find it interesting that Griff gets a hand has a number 3 on the spine. We know it's number 3. And yet they put it last. Even though it's the finale episode, so I guess that's technically the right place. But I find it interesting they put it last when it's number 3 that comes out. I like to keep it in track of what they list the order for these as, because I find it interesting. I keep finding it interesting. And that's the last note for Karen Keeps Her Word. So our very next episode will be Martin Meets the Pirates.